Before the serpent spoke in Eden, another voice had already whispered through the shadows of creation. Long before Eve reached for the forbidden fruit, there was another being, ancient and veiled, whose presence left a stain on the spiritual fabric of the heavens. This creature, rarely mentioned and almost completely erased from Scripture, was not Satan, but something older, something hidden beneath the familiar story. And if you've ever felt that the Eden narrative was missing a piece, you're about to discover what it was. The Bible introduces the serpent in Genesis 3 without warning, without origin, without explanation. It simply says, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field." But where did it come from? Why was it already present in the garden, a place designed to be pure? The traditional answer is that the serpent was Satan, but the text never says that. In fact, the word Satan doesn't appear at all in Genesis. This raises a troubling question. Was there another entity, more ancient, playing a role before Satan ever fell? In ancient Near Eastern traditions, predating even the Hebrew scriptures, there are mentions of chaotic serpent-like beings that opposed divine order, creatures like Leviathan, Tannin, and Nahash, names that appear scattered through the Old Testament, often mistranslated or overlooked. These beings were not just metaphors. They were spiritual realities, feared and respected. And some rabbis believed that one of them may have found its way into Eden, not as Satan, but as something far worse, a remnant of a rebellion before the rebellion. Could it be that the serpent who tempted Eve was not the devil in disguise, but a survivor of a greater fall, a creature from a time before Adam, before the earth, before the light? If so, the Genesis story is not the beginning. It's the continuation of a battle that started long before. And this serpent wasn't tempting Eve out of malice alone. It was fulfilling something ancient, something buried, something never meant to be revealed. In the book of Job, we see a creature called Leviathan, a monstrous serpent of the deep, untamable and terrifying. Described as ancient, crowned and indestructible, it's said to be king over all the children of pride. Some ancient Jewish mystics believed that Leviathan was not just a sea monster, but a spiritual force, a being that once moved freely in the high heavens before being cast down. Could this entity, or one like it, have taken the form of the serpent in Eden? Even in Isaiah 27 we find the phrase, "In that day the Lord will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, and will slay the dragon that is in the sea." Why does Scripture use the word serpent interchangeably with dragon and Leviathan? This isn't poetic coincidence. It suggests that the serpent identity predates the devil as we know him. That serpents, in spiritual symbolism, represent a far older conflict, one not bound to earth alone, but fought in the heavens. Now imagine this. Eden was not just a paradise, it was a stage, a carefully prepared place not only for mankind's testing, but as the final battlefield for a being that had already fallen long before Adam was formed, a serpent that remembered the light and resented it. This creature didn't simply deceive, it was reenacting a rebellion older than the serpent we blame today. This changes everything, because if the serpent was not Satan, but another being, then who was truly behind the fall? And more importantly, what happened to that other serpent? Why is it never mentioned again? Or is it hidden under new names, buried under metaphor, echoing through symbols in prophetic books? The Bible may not have erased it, just veiled it. In Revelation 12, we encounter another serpent, this time described as the great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who deceives the whole world. But notice, the text calls him the ancient serpent, not the serpent of Eden. Could it be that the name ancient refers not just to Satan himself, but to a title he adopted, one that belonged to another being before him. Some scholars have suggested that Satan may have merged identities with this older force, that he may have taken on the legacy of a creature already known for rebellion, already cast down, already connected to the symbol of the serpent. In this view, Satan didn't appear in the garden. He inherited the memory of what the serpent did. He became the new face of an older evil. In fact, early Christian thinkers like Origen and Irenaeus speculated about layers of fallenness, multiple beings who disobeyed God in different eras. They believed that Genesis was not the beginning of sin, but the human entry point into a conflict that had already torn through heaven. And the serpent? It wasn't alone. It may have been the last remnant of a forgotten rebellion. So the serpent in Eden becomes more than a deceiver. It becomes a witness, a living echo of what came before. And Eve's temptation, it wasn't random. It was orchestrated by something, nor someone, who already knew the cost of knowledge, already tasted rebellion, and wanted humanity to fall into the same cycle of exile. And perhaps this is why the serpent spoke so confidently. It didn't ask, it declared, "You will not surely die." It was not guessing. It remembered. It had seen what knowledge did to divine beings before. It had already witnessed how truth, when revealed too soon, becomes a weapon of ruin, and it offered Eve not deception, but a forbidden legacy. What if the serpent's words were not lies, but truths wrapped in the wrong timing? That's what makes this other serpent so dangerous. Not because it opposed God directly like Satan would later do, but because it knew how to twist divine memory. It carried ancient knowledge from a world no longer visible. And in that moment with Eve, it wasn't simply tempting her. It was transferring something. And if this mystery resonates with your spirit, don't let it go. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments from which city or country are you watching this video. We want to know where these ancient truths are reaching. Your comment helps spread this message even further. Let's reveal what was buried together. In some apocryphal writings, particularly among the Dead Sea Scrolls and early mystical commentaries, there are hints of a pre-Adamic race. Beings who existed before humanity, who failed to remain in divine order. Among them, one stands out, a serpent-shaped entity, not fully fallen, not fully loyal. It walked the line between dimensions, and its name was never recorded. Rabbinic sources sometimes refer to the serpent in Eden as Nachash HaKadmoni, the primordial serpent. This title doesn't point to Satan, but to something older, perhaps symbolic, perhaps literal. A being that represents the fusion of divine form and rebellious intention. It wasn't expelled from heaven like Satan. It may have slipped through unnoticed, waiting for its final act inside a garden planted by God. And now, looking back at Genesis 3, the story changes. God doesn't destroy the serpent after the fall. He curses it. He sends it to crawl, to eat dust, a punishment of survival, not annihilation. Why let it live? Unless that being had a role to play beyond Eden. Unless it was not the final enemy, but a signal. A symbol that something more, ancient and hidden, was still in motion. The real enemy may not have been the serpent, but what the serpent remembered. What it carried forward from a rebellion we no longer speak of. A fall before Satan, before man, before Genesis. And perhaps, just perhaps, this serpent still slithers through our theology, wearing new names, hiding behind old stories, waiting to be recognized not as the devil, but as the first deceiver of creation itself. If the serpent of Eden was merely a vessel, a shadow of an older rebellion, then the real threat has always remained just out of view, hidden beneath symbols, concealed behind metaphors. It never needed to speak again, because its seed was planted in the minds of humanity. A single idea, you can be like God. That phrase may have been uttered once, but its echo never stopped. Throughout Scripture we find patterns, whispers of serpents where there should be silence. Moses lifts a bronze serpent in the wilderness, not to destroy it, but to heal. Why would a symbol of salvation take the form of the deceiver? Unless there's something older and more complex about the serpent figure, something that predates Eden and lingers in divine memory. Even Jesus refers to being lifted up like the serpent in the wilderness. This reference, layered in mystery, ties salvation back to the same image that once brought humanity down. Could it be that the serpent archetype was never just evil, but a vessel for divine judgment, knowledge, or testing? And, if so, who first wore that form? This brings us back to the forgotten creature, the one that came before Satan, whose actions reshaped the spiritual realm, the one whose name was buried, but whose influence remained. Perhaps this other serpent was not erased by God, but hidden from man. And only those who search deeply, beyond doctrine, beyond fear, will begin to see its shadow in the light of Scripture. In Isaiah 14, a prophecy against the king of Babylon takes a sudden turn. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. While many interpret this as a reference to Satan, others believe it speaks of a being even older, one whose fall predates the serpent of Genesis. Some ancient commentators viewed this passage as a veiled memory of a fall that split heaven before man ever stood. Psalm 74 contains another cryptic line: "You crushed the heads of Leviathan, you gave him as food to the creatures of the wilderness." But Leviathan is referred to in the plural. Heads, not just a single creature, but a multi-headed being, or perhaps a legacy of serpent-like spirits. Was this the same entity who slithered into Eden, or one of many that descended from the first deceiver? The book of Revelation brings the serpent full circle, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan. But if we've misunderstood that line, if the ancient serpent is not Satan, but a title Satan took on, then the real origin is deeper. Satan may have aligned himself with an identity he did not create, wearing the skin of a power older than himself, and that may explain why the serpent disappears after Genesis 3. Not because it was defeated, but because it fulfilled its task. It wasn't meant to return, because its presence was never about ongoing war, but about planting a fracture, a crack in creation, one that only the Messiah could repair. And even now, that crack is still healing. If the serpent's mission was never about winning, but about disrupting, then its silence after Eden is not absence. It's completion. The damage was done. The knowledge was transferred. Humanity had eaten from the tree. The war that began before time had now entered flesh and blood. And from that moment forward, the true enemy would no longer need to crawl. It could now walk, speak, and rule through mankind. That's why the serpent is rarely mentioned again. Because the greatest deception was never the fruit, it was the idea behind it, that there is no consequence to rebellion, that one could rise higher than the path God prepared. This is the exact temptation Lucifer himself fell to, and it mirrors what the serpent whispered in Eden. Not a lie, but a memory. A prophecy, a cycle repeating itself. Spiritual warfare, then, is not just about resisting the devil we know, but discerning the echoes of the serpent we've forgotten, the voices that carry its legacy, the teachings that sound holy but lead to pride, the ideas that place man at the center and God at the margin. These are the serpents that still move among us, not with scales and fangs, but with convincing light and beautiful words. And perhaps this is the true danger, that we have focused so long on the name Satan, we have forgotten the being he became, the form he adopted, the ancient role he inherited. The title Serpent is not just about Eden, it's about a mystery that predates Genesis and still poisons the world today. Until we name it, it will keep whispering. The serpent's role in Eden was not random, it was permitted. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. God did not stop it. He allowed it to speak, allowed it to tempt. Because the fall of man was not the beginning of defeat, it was the beginning of redemption. A redemption that would not only heal what Adam broke, but reach back and repair what the first Eden had lost. That ancient serpent, whether Leviathan, Nahash, or another unnamed entity, was a shadow of a deeper rebellion. One that corrupted not just space, but spirit. One that fractured light itself. And so in Eden, God allowed humanity to come face to face with the same test that shattered heaven, not to destroy us, but to prepare us for something greater, the rise of a new creation that would choose him freely. This is why Jesus is called the second Adam, because he faced the same voice, the same temptation, the same seduction that once spoke in the garden. But where the first man fell, he stood. Where Eve reached out, he turned. Away, the serpent whispered again, in the desert, through religion, through fear, but this time it was silenced, not by power, but by obedience. And so the story of the other serpent is not just about evil, it's about contrast, about the beauty of a God who allowed darkness to speak so that the light could answer. A light that did not ignore the serpent's history, but overcame it. And when Christ crushed the head of that serpent, he crushed not only Satan, but every ancient voice that had ever defied the throne. And yet the serpent still lingers in our world, not as a creature of flesh, but as an influence, a pattern that keeps returning. Every lie that exalts man above God, every doctrine that glorifies rebellion, every philosophy that questions divine order, these are the fingerprints of the other serpent. It may no longer speak aloud, but it still speaks through hearts unguarded. But now, the veil is thinner. The scrolls are opening. The truth that was once hidden beneath symbols is rising to the surface. And as the end of the age draws near, the ancient serpent's legacy will be exposed, not just in books or theology, but in the choices we make, the spirits we follow, the voices we trust. The garden is no longer a place. It's a battlefield within. That's why discernment is no longer optional. We are not simply resisting sin. We are finishing a war that began before the first man was made. A war between light and the remnants of the first rebellion. And those who walk with the Spirit of God must not only reject the voice of the enemy, they must recognize its disguise, even when it sounds familiar, even when it sounds religious. The other serpent may have come before Satan. It may have fallen before Adam. But it will not outlast the Lamb, because at the end of all things, the true Eden will be restored, and no serpent, old or new, will ever enter it again. Only those whose names are written, not in dust, but in the book of life, will walk that garden without fear. If this message awakens something deep in your spirit, don't let it fade. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because more revelations are coming, and they go far beyond what tradition ever dared to teach. And tell us in the comments, from which city or country are you watching this video? We love to see where these hidden truths are reaching. Together, we're reclaiming what was buried, one revelation at a time.